Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Arash Ramani and today we will be talking about themes, especially in fiction, in short stories and in novels. But first things first, if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I strongly recommend that you do so. You can also click on this bell-shaped icon here to receive notifications as soon as I drop the next videos. So thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel. Also, like this video and write a comment. I will really appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about the idea of theme. If you haven't already seen the previous two videos in this series, which I have entitled Elements of Fiction, I strongly recommend that you pause the video right here, go back, find those videos on the channel, and then watch those videos on other important elements of fiction, including plot and character. And then once you're done with those two videos, come back and continue watching this video about theme. Or if you were just looking for some information about theme, well, go ahead, continue watching this video. Hope you really enjoy it and hope I can teach you a couple of things about another important element of fiction. Okay, let's continue. What is a theme? In these series, we have been talking about different elements which constitute fiction in literature. And so we have talked about plot, we have talked about characters, and today we are talking about the concept of theme in literature. Now, the theme of a piece of fiction is its controlling idea, its central insight, what it tells us about the human psyche, what it tells us about life. So that's the that central insight into human life and into the human psyche is what we usually call the theme of a piece of fiction. It is the unifying generalization about life. So, and unifying is really important for us. It should unify all elements of the story into a single message. Now, I'm not saying that works of literature only have one theme. No, they can have multiple themes, but each one of the themes mentioned should be unifying in its own on its own, and it should bring all of the pieces of the story together to convey the special message that the writer initially had in mind. To derive the theme of a story, we should ask ourselves a series of questions. Now, we will talk about this later on in the video in greater detail, but usually the fundamental and the basic question that you ask yourself is, what is the central purpose of the story? What view of life does the story support? What insight into life does it reveal to us as the readers? Okay, so if you ask yourself those questions and if you can find answers to those questions, then congratulations, you have successfully uncovered the theme of the story you're reading. So it goes without saying that not all stories have theme, and so you should also keep this in mind that you might read a piece of fiction and then you might not come across or find any theme. Theme exists only and only when an author has seriously attempted to record life accurately and to reveal some truth about it. If the writer is not interested in capturing life accurately or providing some truth about life to the readers, will then our search for a theme in that piece of fiction might turn out to be quite futile. So another another important issue to keep in mind is that theme exists only when the writer has mechanically introduced into the story some concept or theory of life that he uses, and again, I'm using he as a generic pronoun here, he or she uses as a unifying element that his story is meant to illustrate. Now, we have previously talked about the difference between escapist fiction and interpretive fiction. It's also worth Noting right here that theme exists in all interpretive fiction, but only in some escapist fiction. And in interpretive fiction, the purpose is different because the theme becomes the purpose of the story. But in escapist fiction, it is just merely an excuse, just to say, hey, I had a theme as well. Uh, in those works, usually something else, like the action is more important than the message or the truth about life that the story might or might not reveal. Okay, in many stories, the theme might be equivalent to the revelation of the human nature or a special type of human character. And so, when a story has as its central purpose the revelation of a special kind of human being, we can safely assume that that is also the theme of the story. Okay. However, more often than not, a story, through its portrayal of specific persons in specific situations, will also have something to tell us about the nature of all human beings. So it's not just specific about one special character. That character turns out to be a representative of a larger group of people. And that's why we usually say that if the revelation of human character is the theme of a piece, then we have to also find some information that can tell us that that revelation also tells us about the nature of all human beings, or about the relationship to one another, or the relationship to the universe. And so the theme of a story, just like its plot, may be stated very briefly or at greater length. Okay. Um, Sometimes we might be able to capture the theme of a piece of a story or a novel in just one sentence, but you should keep in mind that one sentence cannot honestly capture the depth and the complexity of successful stories and novels. So you have to be careful. Okay, so the function of interpretive writers, those serious writers who write beautiful works of fiction for us, is not to simply state the theme, okay, uh, but to vivify it, to kind of show it to us so that we remember it. So writers usually present the theme uh, alongside some emotion so that we always associate that feeling and emotion with the theme of that story and we will remember it forever. So they wish to deliver it not simply to our intellects, because we might forget that, but they wish to deliver the theme of the story to our emotions, our senses, as well as our imaginations. Okay? That's that when they do so, we remember that the theme of that story forever. Now, themes can also be stated explicitly, but this usually happens in didactic literature. If you don't know what didactic literature is, it is a piece of literature written only for educating somebody about some moral lesson. So didactic literature is very restrictive. Its main purpose is to teach and to like impart some morals onto the readers. So the theme of this story is usually stated explicitly only in didactic literature or when you are reading fables like Aesop's fables or parables. However, in serious literature, it is usually implied, and writers, serious writers, usually prefer this. Okay, so because when they imply it, so they try to work on all pieces of the story, right? Imagine that the theme of the story is going to be explicit. Well, then they don't have to really work on characterization. They don't have to like think too deeply about the plot, or for example, their choice of POV, point of view, because well at the end of the story they're going to just simply say, hey, this is the theme of the story, so they don't have to like try really hard. But if they want to imply, then they have to work really hard so that the theme itself arises naturally out of what they have written, and that's what makes it even more challenging and difficult. So because we have talked about like themes being stated explicitly or implicitly, This is a very valid question that most students usually ask. Is the theme of the story synonymous with the moral of the same story, or are they the same? Not necessarily. They could be the same in some didactic literature, parable, or fable, but the word moral is extremely restrictive and narrow. Why is it narrow? Because it sort of implies the term that what we are reading is like in the form of a sermon, that there has to be some moral lesson at the end of it. But serious literature or interpretive fiction doesn't necessarily have to include any moral, you know, um, instruction at the end of the story. Okay, so that's why we prefer the critical term theme for several reasons. First, as we said, well, if we use theme, it is less likely to obscure the fact that the story is not some kind of preachment or, for example, a sermon, because the story, any story's first like objective and purpose is to entertain the readers. Second, if we use the term theme to describe what we are talking about today, then it should keep us from trying to wring from every story a didactic pronouncement about life. Because the person who seeks a moral in every story is likely to oversimplify everything, to not focus on, for example, the intricacies and the complexities of the characters, because well he wants to simplify everything by saying, okay, well, this story was about being generous, and then forgetting about all of the complexities and the intricacies and the idiosyncrasies that the writer has beautifully incorporated into the story and the characters. Okay, so unfortunately, people who are always looking for the moral of the story try to reduce, for example, the a rich story down to, for example, some old platitude like "be kind to animals, look before you leap, crime does not pay," and things like that. Okay, but the purpose of a good story is just more than that. It's not just teaching you some stereotypical moral lessons. The purpose of a good story is to give us greater awareness and a greater understanding of life, not to inculcate some code of like moral rules for your daily life. That's not the purpose of a good story. A good story wants to enrich your own life by giving you a greater understanding of life and characters in life. So now let's talk about the idea of is it really necessary for every piece of fiction that is ever going to be published in the future to have a fresh theme? Obviously not. The revelation offered by a good story might be something fresh, or alternatively, it might be something old. So the story might bring us some insight into life that we didn't know about, or and in that case, it sort of expands and broadens our horizons, or it may make us feel again some truth of which we have long been merely intellectually aware. And so these kinds of stories want to periodically renew our belief systems, our emotions, because emotionally we might forget you know, some aspects of life which are important, and so these stories usually renew them periodically so that we don't forget them. And so, through doing this, they're actually helping us. They are interpreting life for us, and they also give us some insights, or they refresh our old insights for us so that we still continue to be great human beings. Okay, now, when it comes to commercial or escapist fiction, like for the most part, the theme of the story usually confirms all the reader's prejudices, and the theme usually endorses their opinion, ratifies their feelings, and satisfies their wishes. In other words, the theme of such stories are widely accepted platitudes of experience. Everybody agrees with them. There is nothing challenging hidden in the theme of escapist fiction. It's something that you always agree with. However, in interpretive fiction, sometimes our beliefs are questioned. Sometimes our beliefs are challenged because their ideas about life, these interpretive writers and their fictions, their ideas about life are not simply taken or ready made from what they were taught in Sunday school. In other words, they don't just want to tell us what we were told when we were kids. Sometimes they challenge us. The themes of their stories, these interpretive writers, do not often correspond to the pretty little sentiments that they taught us at school, because they may sometimes represent some rather bitter truths about life. They might even be bleak, they might be completely dark, but because they teach us something new, they give us a fresh insight into human life, we value them. And in fact, we prefer them as students and teachers of literature. However, well, you don't have to accept the theme of a story. Like, there is no obligation on your part as a reader to accept the theme of a story, okay? But you shouldn't really dismiss it immediately either, because there is always value in knowing what the world looks like to other people. So it's always a good idea to try to expand our knowledge of human experience, to see what other or how other people think, right, about the same topic. So we shouldn't really dismiss a piece of the theme of a piece of fiction simply because we don't agree with it. It always helps when we hear other people's opinions as well. And that's why we say that literature teaches plurality. You know, we can have multiple correct opinions at the same time. That's what literature is all about. Okay, but probably the million dollar question here is, how can we find the theme of a story, and how can we state it? This is an extremely delicate task. And the reason why it is delicate is because sometimes we can feel the theme of a story, but we are unable to verbalize it. And sometimes it is, let's be honest, sometimes when you are reading for at home and not for school, you don't really have to mention it, right? It is completely unnecessary to mention it. You're just reading a novel or a story for yourself, and there's nobody around, and there's no one asking you to verbalize the theme of the piece. So sometimes you just feel it, and that's okay. Sometimes it's completely unnecessary to mention it. However, I would like to argue that trying to mention the theme of a story even when you are alone is extremely beneficial. The attempt to state a theme will reveal to us aspects of the story that we should otherwise not have noticed, and will thereby lead to more thorough understanding. I don't know if you have ever had this kind of experience or not, but you know they say that teaching is learning. Sometimes you obviously you read something, and you think that you have understood it like completely, but then when you have to teach it to a younger sibling, you also realize some hidden aspect of it that you were completely unaware of, and that enriches your understanding, right? That's why trying to state or mention the theme can actually be very beneficial and helpful. Also, it is a test of our understanding, so it's usually a good idea to mention the theme and then try to ask others to see if they have come up with the same theme, so that we can make sure that we have actually understood the piece correctly. Okay, so what is the best method? What is the best method for finding and stating the theme? Usually, the best method is by asking yourself this question: in what way has the main character changed in the course of the story? Because usually, the change that the character experiences in the story is actually synonymous or even identical to the theme of the piece. Another question you can ask yourself is this: what, if anything, the character has learned before the end of the story? Because what he has learned can also be the theme of this story. And sometimes the best approach is to explore the nature of the central conflict. If you have watched the video on plot, you're already familiar with what conflict is, different types of conflict that we have in literature. So, finding the central conflict in literature will actually help you find the theme of the story. And of course, sometimes the title will provide some clue. However, if you want to make certain and if you want to be able to state the theme of a story or a novel perfectly, you have to pay attention to six principles. And we are going to talk about them one by one. Principle number one: the theme of a story must be expressible in the form of a statement with a subject and predicate. So, stating the theme with just one keyword is not enough. It's not enough to say, okay, the theme of this piece is motherhood. That's not enough. You should always express it in the form of a sentence, which has a subject and a predicate. So, it is insufficient to say that, for example, the theme of a story is motherhood or even loyalty to a country, like a phrase like this, because like they are just the subjects of the sentence, but what about them, right? So the theme might be a statement about the subject, not just the subject expressed alone. For instance, motherhood sometimes has more frustrations than rewards. That can be the theme of a piece because, well, motherhood is the subject of the story, and the subject of this statement, but we also have a predicate. Or loyalty to country often inspires heroic self sacrifice. That can also be the theme of a story, but loyalty itself or motherhood alone cannot be the themes of stories. At least you shouldn't mention it like that. If somebody asks you to express the theme of a story, always make sure you say a sentence. Principle number two: the theme must be stated as a generalization about life. Okay? So in stating the theme, we do not use the names of the characters or refer to precise places or events. For to do so is to make it specific. Make it specific rather than general statement. In the previous video about character, we talked about Child by Tiger by Thomas Wolfe, and we talked about the character of Dick Prosser. Now, if you want to talk about the theme of that piece, you shouldn't say, well, it's about a character named Dick Prosser, who's a very gentle human being, but things happen in the story, especially the racial injustice that he sees in the society, and therefore he turns into this wild, uh, dark human being who goes on a killing spree, right? That is not the theme of the story because, as we said, it should be expressed as a generalization, not about a single specific character in this story. But the theme of that story could be about, for example, the dark side of the fact that, for example, human beings, regardless of how gentle they look, always have a dark side, which might come to the surface given certain, uh, you know, given they are motivated to do it in a certain situation, like given the motivations that the society might give them in order to become violent. Okay, principle number three: we must be careful not to make the generalization larger than is justified by the terms of the story. Now, in the previous principle, I told you that it should be stated generally, but we have to be careful not to take it to the extreme, okay? So it should not be made larger than what is supported by the story. So terms, we refrain from using terms like always, all, okay? They should be used cautiously. Terms like, for example, some, sometimes, or may are often more accurate. Now, when we are talking about, again, in the previous video, we talked about the Japanese twins. So the theme of that story is not about, certain sensations in springtime, that happen to all people, right? Therefore, if you want to state the theme of that story, you shouldn't say that, all people in the springtime, experience some sensations which remind them of the change in seasons and the fact that they have to do something about their lives. It's not about all people, that's for sure. So we have to change it. We have to change it to this, for example. In springtime, there usually comes to those upper middle class people, because that's what the story is about, uh, whose lives are bound by respectability and regulated by convention, a peculiar impulse toward life, freedom, and beauty. But the impulse is seldom strong enough to overcome the deep seated forces of habit and convention. Okay, so let's talk about principle number 4. As we said, the theme of a story is the central and unifying concept of the story. Therefore, A, B, C. The theme of a story, it must account for all of the major details of the story. That's a must. B, the theme must not be contradicted by any detail in the story. And finally, C, the theme must not rely upon supposed facts. Okay, everything should be inside the story, nothing outside it. So, in stating the theme of the story, you have to be careful that your sentence, which recaps the theme of the story, should also act as a unifying sentence, which accounts for all of the major details of the story, is not contradicted by any detail in the story, and does not depend on supposed facts. Let's talk about principle number 5. And this is really important. There is no one way of stating the theme of a story. We can state the theme of the story in multiple ways, right? And again, in our last video, we talked about the story of the kiss. Now, you can talk about the theme of the story in so many different ways. Here are 3 different examples. So, the story is about this group of soldiers who go to a ball, who go to a party, and then one of the soldiers goes into a room, and then the room is dark. Suddenly, a lady comes into the room and probably mistakes him for the lover with whom she had a rendezvous, and she gives him, this soldier, this innocent soldier, a kiss. And this kiss transforms the soldier completely. So, what is the theme of the story? We can express it in 3 different ways at least. The emotions of a shy young man may spring almost entirely from fancy rather than from fact. B. A shy man who builds a romance upon a trifling incident may find that the return to reality disillusions and embitters him. 3. A shy man is capable in his imagination of building up out of some trivial incident a fantastically absurd romantic dream life that he emotionally mistakes for reality, at the same time that he intellectually knows it to be false. When the romantic bubble is pricked, he may plunge from the heights of ecstasy to the depths of despair, though in reality there has been no basis for either emotion. So these are the different ways, some of the different ways we can express the theme of the story The Kiss by Anton Chekhov. Let's talk about principle 6. We should avoid any statement that reduces the theme to some familiar saying, those platitudes that we talked about, that we have all heard in our lives before, like you can't judge a book by its cover. That can not be the theme of a work, okay? You shouldn't say it like this, or a stitch in time saves nine. Because if you do so, you will be considered as a lazy person. This is a lazy man's shortcut. A person who does not want to spend some time making his or her own sentences about the theme of the story. It also restricts the story. It completely destroys the richness and the complexity of the story. And so that's why you have to write your own sentences when it comes to the theme of the story. Thank you very much, everyone. This is the end of the 3rd video in a series I have entitled Elements of Fiction. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so right now. Also, click on this bell-shaped icon so that you'll receive notifications and you are the first person to watch the next video as soon as I drop them. Uh, please watch the videos on plot and character. This one was on theme. Our next video will be about point of view, which is another significant element of fiction. Once again, thank you very much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't also forget to give me a thumbs up by hitting the like button. And please also write a comment or two. That will help me a lot. Thank you very much and have a nice day. See you next time.